All right, good morning, freshmen. Here we are again, trekking our way through Acts of the Apostles. Very exciting stuff that you've read the last couple of days about the spread of the gospel beyond Jerusalem to even now the Gentile world. Let's just think about that for a second. So we saw first Stephen's persecution. The Sanhedrin took him out of the city and stoned him to death. And then there was a dispersion of many of the Christians from Jerusalem to get away from this persecution. And then they started encountering different people, and the Samaritans accepted the gospel with Philip, and then Philip the eunuch down in Egypt and so forth. And then we have this scene that you commented on yesterday in your commentary of Peter in Joppa going to the house of Cornelius and the Holy Spirit coming down upon Cornelius and his entire family. That was this incredible moment of revelation. Cornelius being a Gentile, and then they were baptized and they became members of the church. That's in Acts chapter 10. Humongously important event. So then you read on from that of Saul and Barnabas going on their missionary journeys and Gentiles converting to Christianity or to the gospel, to the faith, and being baptized as part of their journey in Cyprus and Asia Minor. That's present-day Turkey. So again, wow, that's powerful stuff, but that leads to a huge problem. And that's what I want to talk about today. Okay. Just quick side point, I'm just going to walk through this. The conversion of Saul, this is an iconic moment in the history of the church. Saul being a persecutor of the Christians, and was one there who was there at the stoning of Stephen. But yet on the way to Damascus, where he's ready to lock up Christians, he's ready to find them and do some nasty stuff with them, he's knocked down by a blinding light. This is in Acts chapter 9. And he hears this voice, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you? I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. And then he is blinded for 3 days. And then in Damascus, Ananias, who's a Christian, comes to him and lays his hands on him and says, Saul, my brother, the Lord has sent me. Jesus has appeared to you on the way by which you came, that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately scales fell from his eyes and he was baptized. So this is a dramatic event. This really changes the course of history because Paul becomes the most important missionary to the Gentiles. I mean, really at the beginning of the church. So, and plus Paul's theology is absolutely crucial for understanding what Christianity is all about. And that's what the letters are, especially Romans 1 and 2 Corinthians. Those are the most important ones. So very, very important. But moving ahead now to the problem that the Gentile converts create. What is the problem? The problem is this, because all of the first Christians were Jewish, all of them. Jesus was Jewish. It was a Jewish movement. Everything about it was Jewish. Do Gentile converts have to become Jewish in order to be Christian? That is, do they have to follow the Torah? Do they have to obey the Sabbath? Do they have to be circumcised? Do they have to follow the laws of the food eating and so forth? Okay, so what do we do with all these Gentiles now that we have them? Okay, that's the issue. That's the struggle. And this is really a question about what is Christianity? Is Christianity a Jewish sect, a Jewish subgroup, or is it a independent universal religion? So, this is fundamental, right? Nothing that Jesus said can be construed, perhaps, as being like, oh, you can just throw off the Torah, throw off the law, and don't be Jewish anymore. Okay, so the question is one of interpretation. What do we do with all these Gentile converts? Obviously, the Gentiles don't want to get circumcised. Obviously, they don't really want to follow these customs that seem to them to be very strange. So what do we do with that? So eventually things come to a head. And we have the Council of Jerusalem in AD 49. And this is huge. Big hitters are here. This is in Acts chapter 15. You're going to read that today. Peter was there. James, one of the other apostles who was leader of the church in Jerusalem. Paul is there. Okay, we got some heavy hitters in the history of the church. So they all meet in Jerusalem to discuss the problem of the Gentile converts. So what's the question? should the Gentile converts be circumcised and follow the Jewish law? So this is what you're going to read about in Acts 15. And after the testimonies of Paul and Peter, they come to see, wait, no, Gentiles do not need to become Jewish and follow the whole of the Torah in order to be Christian. Why? Okay, so that's what they decide. That's the decision. Why? Well, the Holy Spirit came down upon them, and Peter and Paul testified to that. God made no distinction between the Gentiles and the Jews, that they have been purified in a sense by faith and not by the works of the Torah. So without the works of the Torah, the Holy Spirit came down upon them. So clearly it's not necessary. The works of the Torah are not necessary. Okay, but there's some caveats to that. Okay, so that's the discernment of the church. Okay, this is them discerning God's activity and what they're supposed to do. But they make some caveats to that. And what are those caveats? Avoid the pollution from idols. Of course, in every single city in the Roman Empire, there were temples and there was idolatry, and they were offering animal sacrifices and other types of sacrifices before all these different gods, Zeus, Apollo, and so on. So none of that, okay? No more sacrifices, no more going to the temple. Obviously, there's one God, okay? So for the Jews, that's absolutely crucial and important and non-negotiable. One, unlawful marriage, okay? So there was a lot of crazy marital and non-marital practices. And so the thing was, you have to follow the rules of the Torah on marriage. Very, very important. So that's there from the 1st century AD, the Christian understanding of marriage, monogamy, and so forth. Okay, right there. The meat of strangled animals and blood. Okay, meat of strangled animals is meat that was offered in sacrifice to the gods. So this was considered to be polluted or to be unclean. You couldn't eat it. So what would happen is they would offer animals in sacrifice, but then they'd have all this meat left over, so they would sell that in the market. The temple priests, these pagan temple priests, would sell that in the market, at a cheap price. And so a lot of Christians, early Christians, were poor, so these are the type of food that they ate, but no dice. And then also blood being a sacred symbol for the Jews, and no, you can't, no more drinking of blood and so forth, okay? Because these were all tied to these sort of pagan rituals. So there was some break. You had to change. There were new things that you had to do and things that you had to avoid from your pagan life, but it wasn't the full-on, wholehearted 622 precepts of the Torah. Okay. So that's what's decided in AD 49, chapter 15 of Acts, and that's binding on the church. And they write letters, and they send the letters to the churches. This is an example of the discernment of the church. One of the key themes of Acts. Discernment of the church, trying to understand what God is doing beyond what Jesus has taught, right? They still have to figure things out. And this is also an example of the didache, the teaching authority of the apostles. What the apostles say here is definitive, becomes part of what the church is about. And here in this stained glass, you see Peter, right? Laying it down and saying, look, this is it now. So some really important stuff, Acts 15 that you're going to read today, very, very important. So I just wanted you on it. So then there's a real issue that comes as a result of this decision, Acts 15. What happens to the Jewish relationship with the Christians? What is their relation to Judaism? And that's something we're going to talk about tomorrow. Stay tuned.